What's the most out-of-touch thing you've heard someone say? Well, it came from my own mouth. We live on Mount Hope Bay in Rhode Island. At one time, the local electric company had a power plant across the bay from us with these two enormous cooling towers. The plant was decommissioned and shut down, leading to the towers having to be demolished with controlled explosions to bring them down. That happened during a weekend when my husband and I went to New York for an event. And while at the event, my iPhone began acting up, so I took it to the Apple Store in Grand Central Station. We wanted to check in on the demolition. After all, if we were home, the spectacle would have been front and center in our view. I pulled up the local news on the computer, and lo and behold, there was a video of the cooling towers being brought down. My husband was a couple of aisles over looking at devices. With incredible glee, I yelled across the store, "Honey, I found the video of the towers coming down." Of course, no sooner did I say it, and I could hear my voice echoing off the granite walls. Did I even realize where I was and what I just said? I could hear a pin drop in all of Grand Central. My phone was repaired, and we quickly left. Another time was when a good friend's young son passed away. The friend, let's call him John, and his wife are very kind, outgoing, and well connected in the community. As such, the funeral was highly attended, including many locally well-known people, the mayor, numerous city and state legislators, business owners, news anchors, a few local athletes, etc. To accommodate the numbers, it actually had to be moved from their parish church to one of those big modern churches. After the funeral, talking with another couple in the crowded church lobby, I noticed John and his wife talking to some other people about 15 feet away, with clusters of other people nearby who seemed to be politely waiting for their turn to offer condolences. Right at that moment, a man, who John later described as that awkward neighbor who comes over at weird times and stays too long, walked straight up to John, threw his arm around him, and said, in a tone and volume you might use if this instead was his son's high school graduation, "Hey, it's real who's who around here, ain't it? Congrats." I've never felt more mortified at anything in my life. Story 2. I'm in my early 30s and have played tennis all my life. A friend at the club I was a member of asked me to join her on the committee as she wanted more younger members. As tennis is very archaic in its structure, the LTA, the UK Tennis Authority, only recently decided every tennis club in the UK should have an updated division and inclusion policy. Obviously, this included things that most of us assume would be standard, including stating that all clubs should be welcoming of all kinds of people. One member of the committee, a retired man in his late 70s and ex-lawyer, was reading this document intently while the rest of us discussed how to make sure to implement the LTA guidelines. After about 40 minutes, he looked up and, deadpan, asked the committee, "Does this mean the same genders can go meet up in the comfort rooms now?" Everyone was silent and stunned. I managed to be the first one to speak up, saying that no one would be doing that and that having certain preferences does not make someone a deviant. The worst part is that this guy was voted in as a chairman the following year, and thus I left the club. Another incident occurred at a luncheon where my 54-year-old mother, who has not had a real job since she was 19 because she married my wealthy father, and her working friends were having a conversation about the shortage of workers at the banquet at the hotel one of her lady friends manages. My mom, with her best intention to help out her friend, offered to work preparing for an upcoming event. They proceeded to talk about her pay. My mom stated, "I'm expecting $2,000 per week and willing to work 8 hours per day, 2 to 3 days per week. I would consider a long-term position if this event works out well." Her friends just laughed, thinking she was joking, and said that a prep cook's wage starts at $16 an hour. My mom busted out her phone's calculator, did the math, and said, "But that's not even $400 per week. Why would anyone work for so little money?" One of her friends asked, "All of us here go to work every single day. How much do you think we make a month?" My mom's guess was $12,000 to $15,000. Everyone rolled their eyes in disbelief at how out of touch my mother was. Story 3. My mother is elderly, and it seems like the older she gets, the less she comprehends. Not dementia, but similar. The other day, she asked me why these skydivers in a YouTube video were falling at the same rate as a guy without a parachute on. One guy threw his pack out of the plane and jumped with his buddies, filming it. The plan was to grab it mid-air, secure it to his body, and pull the cord before hitting the ground. She couldn't understand why the camera guy and the other divers were falling at the same rate as the guy without a pack. I said, "Well, just wearing it on your back doesn't slow you down, Mom. You have to pull the cord in order for it to deploy and slow a person down." She literally thought that just wearing a parachute on your back was enough to save a person. and couldn't figure out why the guy trying to put his pack on midair was falling just as fast. I was so astonished that she couldn't understand the concept that I just sat there with my head in my hands for a few minutes, just thinking, how do I begin to explain this to a 79-year-old lady? Also, what? You can't just ask your mom for $20? This was way back when I was young and my friend had no idea what being poor was actually like. His family lived on like $10 million worth of land, and both his parents had very well paying jobs, but I only had my mom, who struggled. He invited me to some event, then got mad when I said I couldn't go because it cost too much. He wasn't aware that being poor wasn't just for homeless people, it was for his friends at school too. The same guy also constantly talked crap about me not going to college when he was paid for by his family and I didn't qualify for any scholarships. He also continually talked crap about me not having a job when I ended up homeless right after graduation in another state with no ID or address. I stopped talking to him when I realized that he thought saying those things would magically present me with the opportunities that he had. Story 4. This one is a kid, and kids just don't know any better as they haven't had the real world experience yet, so no hate. But I also want to say this kid was old enough and mature enough to be less ignorant. So I had a kid one time after the 4th of July tell me the 4th of July was the worst day of my life. Naturally, I asked why it was so bad, and they told me the following. We were at my grandparents' lake house all weekend. We took the boat out on the lake, but the lights on the boat were out, so when it got dark, we had to go back and watch the fireworks from the shore. We have kids in Ukraine leaving their homes, being separated from their fathers and or hiding in cold bunkers for weeks. And this kid's worst day of their life was when the lights on the boat were out at their grandparents' lake house. Another is from the new CEO at my company who said that we should just deal with the commute and be prepared to come back to the office sometimes, and that if we weren't prepared, we wouldn't have chosen to live somewhere outside the city, like people actually have a choice. A couple of people actually called him out on being incredibly tone deaf. The median price of a regular old single family home in our city, anywhere, even just outside the city limits, is over $500,000. The company doesn't pay people nearly enough to just drop money on that, especially considering mortgage rates are going back up. Your offer usually has to be above list, and a bunch of seedy career landlords have grabbed up all the affordable housing to rent out for a profit, which also drives up the down payment you have to make if your mortgage lender decides a condo community you're looking at is primarily investor owned. That happened to me. I barely scraped out enough to live here, and even then, it's a small place in a sketchy area. I couldn't believe how out of touch this guy was. Story 5. I used to work for a minor aristocrat. Some advice he gave out in absolute sincerity over the years. Don't take out a mortgage, whatever you do, terrible things. You'll end up paying a lot more for your house, you know? The thing about a Bentley is that you have to have a crap car too. I mean, there are times when a Bentley just isn't appropriate and what you need is a crap car. My crap car later turned out to be an expensive Alfa Romeo and a Bentley to be several Bentleys, recommending the Ritz in London as a place for regular after-work drinks. I don't know how anyone survives on their company's salary alone. His salary was more than £300,000, about $500,000 a year. Also, my mother-in-law is pretty wealthy. We went on a trip to Cabo, and as we were driving back to the airport, we passed by some really poor areas in Mexico. She tapped me on the shoulder and pointed out the car window at a neighborhood of shacks and huts as we passed by. I said, "That's awful." And she said, "They are some of the happiest people you will ever meet." It seemed incredibly out of touch to me for a wealthy white Christian woman who wants for nothing to assume that people living without running water and electricity are the happiest of people. She was very much trying to teach me that money doesn't equal happiness, but she has obviously never met any of those people. She has no idea what the state of their happiness is. It must help her sleep at night when it's hard to think about how she has so much and others have so little to tell herself that they don't care and are probably happier in their poverty. Well, maybe they are happy, who knows, but I think it's really out of touch for her to assume that in her position, where she has zero perspective. Story 6. I worked at a grocery store in an area that was mostly populated by students but adjacent to a couple of super affluent neighborhoods. We got a lot of students using EBT food stamps, but also a lot of wealthy middle-aged people. One time I scanned and bagged a girl's groceries, but when she swiped her EBT, she was about $5 short. I turned the transaction screen around and we chose a few items to void so that she could pay and also have a little left on her card. Then I removed the items from her bags, she paid, got her receipt, etc. By this time, the man behind her had been waiting for about 4 or 5 minutes. I rang him up for his cart, which included a $50 bottle of scotch, by the way, and he started saying how rude it was that the girl just didn't pay with her other card. Normally, I would just change the subject, but he kept talking about it. As he was doing this, I asked if he knew how many smoked salmon were in his cart so I could enter a quantity instead of scanning each one. And he said, "Oh, I'm not sure, a bunch." Not that this mattered, but smoked salmon is super pricey and it just added to the whole thing. Finally, I finished bagging his groceries and he handed me one of those ostentatious, metal, heavy, thick, whatever credit cards and said, "This one won't decline," and winked at me. I guess it wasn't one thing he said, but it was just such an uncomfortable interaction. And he was genuinely annoyed at and confused by the girl not just using her other card. I honestly don't even know if he understood how debit cards worked, let alone EBT cards. I'm so glad she had left by then and didn't have to listen to him. Also, who the hell needs what ended up being 7 smoked salmons? Story 7. I grew up in upper middle class suburbia and then spent a fair amount of time as an incredibly poor adult. The amount of advice I got was just so out of touch. Most are covered in memes, but this one was personal. Keep in mind that this was 1989 when a VCR was about $200 retail. My dad's wife, he remarried after I moved out, was scoping out my wife, who grew up poor. She invited her to fancy tea or something, one of those high end country club types of affairs. During the conversation, she mentioned to my wife that she'd lent her a VHS tape for something. "Oh, we don't have a VCR." "What? Well, go buy one. They're sold in all the major stores now." "No, I know, but you see, we can't afford one." "Well, how much could one be?" $200 for a cheap one." "Well, there you are." We don't have $200. That's 2 weeks of food for us." My wife said later this look of fear flashed before her eyes as if the concept of being too poor to buy a VCR was something she had never experienced. That ended the conversation, and she abruptly cut the lunch short like she had nothing more to say. That woman barely spoke to us again. Although, now that I think about it with decades of experience later, I wonder if it wasn't snobbery, but more of a "I made a huge social faux pas and then didn't speak to us out of her own embarrassment cringe." I don't know. Still, the woman isn't a bad person, but she is, as they used to say in the upper middle class, uncomplicated. That's crazy how some people are just disconnected from reality, right? Now, if you're scratching your head as much as I am, please do hit that like button and let me know you're enjoying the content. And while you're at it, be a part of the community and subscribe if you haven't already. Story 8. I worked for a very high net worth family. A relative passed away in our state, and a lot of his relatives lived out of state. My boss was telling his mom that they needed to pay to fly people here for the funeral because they all lived paycheck to paycheck. His mom inquired how much the flights would cost. He said a few $100. She responded, "That's it? Surely they can afford that. That's nothing." He responded, "Mom, do you know what paycheck to paycheck means? That means they have no extra money." She said, "Of course I know what it means, but that's nothing. Everyone has that." The exchange went on for a bit more, but you get the gist. It was disgusting. I finally told them that if it was such a big deal, I'd pay for their flight so they could come pay their respects. She finally caved, but still thinks they were taking advantage of her. This was just a few months ago, clearly showing the wealthy are still nowhere near understanding what most people go through. This is just one example of the crazy, wealthy behavior I see on a daily basis. I could write a frickin' book. Story 9. A few years ago, I had a rough patch. Several times I came so close to landing these amazing jobs, but I would get screwed over in the end. I was disheartened, to say the least. I did everything in my power to secure these dream jobs, but still failed through no fault of my own. For example, one job strung me along to the point where I had already moved to a new city since I was told the company would have me start as soon as I moved. Then I was essentially ghosted. I found out through the grapevine that my job had been given to unpaid interns. I learned the hard way that until you sign a contract, trust no one. This was around my 30th birthday, a big one to say the least. My father, who was living several states away, sent me a surprise package in the mail. The first thing I took out was a fountain pen. I figured he bought it because he knew I liked writing stories, although I mainly typed them on the computer, but still. Then the next thing I pulled out was a resume paper. There was a small note about just needing to keep on pounding the pavement. I cried. Story 10. I grew up very poor. My father often didn't have a dollar on him. When I was young in college, I was often broke too. My roommate in college grew up in a nice upper middle class household. One day, she wanted to go to an event of some kind and kept pushing me to come with her. I told her that I was broke, and she said, "No problem, you probably wouldn't need more than $50." I repeated that I didn't have any money, hoping she'd just drop it. She said she'd spring for the drink so I could possibly get by with $30. At this point, I said, "I can't, I don't even have $30." She said, "No problem, I can lend it to you until you can get to the bank on Monday." I just wanted it to stop, so I threw humiliation to the wind and handed her my checkbook. I had a balance of 17 cents. She just stared at it with her mouth open and her brow furrowed, still not understanding that there are people who don't have a dollar to their name. 45 years later, my ears still get hot at that memory. Story 11. From a well off friend. I don't know why more people don't have a Tesla. It's such a great investment. Even after discussing with them the price tag, they still just can't believe everyone doesn't have $50,000 for a vehicle. From another well off friend, when we told him we couldn't go on a cross country trip to see him, "It's only spring, have you used your travel budget already?" It turns out they've been given several grand a year from parents exclusively earmarked for travel, and they assumed literally everyone else had the same thing. He had absolutely no clue, and honestly, I'm still not sure he gets it. From a very well off relative, at some point, you just have to start ordering bottle service when at a bar. It makes more sense, followed by a complaint about how hard it is dealing with capital gains taxes. No, bro, it makes more sense for me to order tall boy PBRs. From a dumb relative after her DIL was put on a ventilator for the virus, had no idea people could actually get sick from this. Story 12. My mother told me that autism and ADHD are made up conditions and that people didn't have them in her time. Then she tried to convince me to use aromatherapy oils to cure my son, who was diagnosed with ADHD at age 6 and autism at age 10, even though we've been very successfully managing both with medication. Another was when I lost my dad. Our family is very, very close, and I wasn't expecting that, so I was hit pretty hard. A month after his passing, I was picking up a book at a friend's house, but my friend wasn't home, so her mother was the one to give me the book. She asked how my family was, and I said we were trying to get back on our feet. Her exact words were, "Oh, don't worry, honey, give it a year or two and you'll forget your father ever existed." I was shocked. She continued saying that first we forget their voices and then their faces. I left her house feeling numb, sad, and scared that I would forget my father. Story 13. Why don't you just buy a house? What an absolutely terrific idea. I can't believe I didn't think of that. Let's see, the cheapest house in my neighborhood is currently $335,000 and has plumbing and wiring left over from the 1970s, no central heating, foundation problems, a roof that needs replacing, the oldest water heater I have ever seen in my life, a gopher issue, bad windows, a terrible location with a driveway that opens up right onto one of the busiest streets in town, and the smallest backyard ever. The bank won't approve us for a loan on the mortgage because they think we can't pay it, even though we pay $200 more than it a month in rent even after the fees. That's the idea, in the garbage. What other brilliant fixes do you have for my life? Story 14. I don't know why you would go to a community college when you can go to a university, said a high school guidance counselor giving a lecture on college admissions essays and applications in my senior AP English class, after I asked naively if there's anything I had to do for community college. It turns out I had other classmates in the same boat who wanted to know too, but felt too embarrassed to ask. Anyway, I went to community college to get my prerequisites out of the way and got my associate's degree. I then transferred to the university for a competitive nursing program. I saved money from those first 2 years in community college and didn't get a loan until I got into uni. I still can't forget that guidance counselor. So, did these stories make you shake your head in disbelief? I know I did, and I have to end it here, but if you're into more incredulous things people hear out of nowhere, watch this one next. What's the most disturbing thing you've heard said casually? Story 3 gave me goosebumps. I'll see you there, and thank you for watching this one.